Today, we're honored to have the award-winning attorney behind the largest civil rights case, Greg Francis, who will share his pursuit of justice in his newly released book, Just Harvest. Attorney Francis, thank you and welcome.
Well, thank you for having me here today. It's a pleasure to be here.
Tell us about your book.
The book, Just Harvest, kind of chronicles my plight and my story as I saw it in representing a group of black farmers. It ended up being the largest civil rights case ever, as you indicated. But more importantly for me, I was able to give a voice to the farmers in the courtroom. And with this book, I'm hoping to give them a voice out in the general public.
And for those who aren't familiar, please just kind of give us a recap or a quick summary of the case and why it's so important.
Sure. There is we really have to go all the way back to, if we go all the way back history-wise to slavery. When the slaves were freed, the most important thing, or the biggest asset they had, was their ability to farm. They had worked on plantations and farmed. So many blacks who were freed from slavery went into farming. Right around that same time, America created the USDA because they understood how important it was to ensure that there was food that would be available for the population as the nation continued to grow. And the purpose of the USDA was to support the farmers, support them in terms of expansion, sometimes loans for operating, acquiring more land, that type of thing. Unfortunately, although we had a change in legislation, meaning the Emancipation Proclamation freeing us, we did not have a change of heart. And those who had previously enslaved the slaves was now in charge of giving out this public money to the different farmers and whatnot. So what would happen systemically over time, starting really with the local office, the black farmers would just be denied. Now, that denial may come in a bunch of different forms. Sometimes it was as blatant as just throwing the application away in front of the farmer. Sometimes they'd be given a runaround, told to go to different offices or different farm service offices where you would apply for these loans. And sometimes, that they would take it in on the auspices of they were going to process it and never process it. Ultimately, there were studies done by the USDA themselves. And it was really started when Mike Espy became the Secretary of Agriculture. He started looking into it because his father was a farm service agent. And ultimately, it resulted in a lawsuit, Pigford versus Glickman. Glickman is the head of the USDA that succeeded Mike Espy once he left. And it involved, the systemic discrimination of black farmers in terms of loans and not getting loans and not getting the support that the other white farmers were getting. Unfortunately, at the time of the initial case, most of the farmers who would be eligible for the award really didn't believe that the government that had for so long treated them inappropriately was now going to compensate them. So unfortunately, many missed that deadline. There was a 6-month deadline to file claims. Subsequent to that, understanding that most of the farmers who had been aggrieved had not had their cases heard on the merits, there was a second phase of the case which I led. After a bunch of lobbying with Congress to get more funding for these farmers, we ultimately were able to get that to file another case and ultimately get justice for these farmers.
And how much was the settlement?
The settlement was $1.25 billion.
Congratulations again to you and all the people you represent. And so how will that money be used?
That money was given out mainly to the farmers. Each successful farmer who was able to prove or who were able to prove that they had been discriminated against or denied a loan were given $50,000. Actually $62,500 because $12,500 went for taxes. So we ended up with almost 19,000 farmers or their families, their descendants, who were compensated with that money.
And what help is still needed?
Not a lot has changed. We were kind of on the upswing after this case, and with the previous administration we're kind of on the upswing and things were getting better. But when you look back at the statistics again from the last administration to now, during that time, during those 4 years, black farmers got 1/10 of 1% of the billions of dollars that were given out by the USDA.
1/10 of 1%.
You heard me right, 1/10 of 1%. And these are the USDA sharing their statistics. So with the new administration and with the COVID relief funding that has been out there, there's been proposed $5 billion for debt relief for farmers, black farmers, to apply to have their debt relieved. Unfortunately, that has resulted in a lawsuit by a number of white farmers who indicate that they believe they're being discriminated against. So that's being held up right now.
That was going to be a question with all the attention so I'm sure, like you did, so I appreciate the walk through history.
Right.
And so I would imagine that there are some people reacting to the amount of this settlement and the fact that it's being awarded to black farmers only. And so I'm sure you've received some pushback.
We received a bunch of pushback during the case, and even now, there is some pushback in terms of what's really fair for these black farmers. The debt relief was not giving the farmers anything; it's really relieving debt that the USDA has on their books. But the numbers have dwindled. In the early 1920s, there were probably 960,000 black farmers. By the time I got involved in the case, there were less than 30,000 black farmers. And that number continues to dwindle as time goes on because of the lack of funding and resources.
Wow, that's amazing. So how did you come to be involved in this case?
It's just fortuitous. I was in Mississippi actually representing a group of poultry workers at some of the chicken plants on a totally separate issue. We ultimately decided to open an office in Mississippi and started advertising for, kind of the general cases that we would advertise for. And we would get calls from black farmers. Well, are you going to will you represent us? Will you, get involved in this case? And I'll be honest with you, growing up here in Orlando, Florida, I initially thought this can't be true. This can't be true because we're talking about discrimination between 1981 and 1996.
And
that's the only period of time that we were able to bring the cause of action. And I just didn't really believe that what they were alleging was happening was actually happening. But after hearing it over and over, and after getting a visit from a set of brothers who, one drove from Texas, one drove from Oklahoma to see me in Mississippi, and I sat and talked with them for 3 or 4 hours. And at the end of that, I was convicted. I had to be involved in the case. Being in law school, I always, prayed that I did good. But I did well too. So I thought this was my opportunity to do good. I didn't know how well I would do.
Which was what I was wondering as you were speaking. Why did you want to be a lawyer?
I didn't grow up wanting to be a lawyer initially. I grew up and I initially wanted to be an engineer. But once I was in college and started taking courses, chemistry and calculus were not my forte, as I thought it would be. So I decided to go to law school. And in law school, I grew up in a neighborhood where everyone didn't go the right way or do the right thing. My best friend that I grew up with is doing life in prison for murder. And it's just one of those things where I saw him slowly go astray and there not be any help. And I said, you know what, he didn't have anyone to speak for him. So it was my goal, being a lawyer, to speak for those who couldn't speak for themselves.
Wow. It's rewarding, especially when you get an opportunity like this and see, and you can see what you've done for others. So,
right. It is, again, it kind of fulfilled my prayer that I would pray in law school, which is, do good and do well at the same time. Yeah,
it's hard to even think about this scenario when you're in law school. So what would you say to law students?
Study hard, concentrate on whatever class it is that you have. There are so many different facets of law that are out there. It's important to just make sure, of course, you get those basics, but to follow your dreams once you obtain that degree.
And so what's your background? I just want to dive a little bit into that before we close out, because you have done so much for these farmers. And so what does this mean for you personally and your particular journey?
Right. This has really been a journey, and I've had a lot of personal edification on this. I'm originally from Panama in Central America, so when I came to America, I didn't speak much English. Spanish was my primary language, but you know, here in Orlando during that time, it wasn't cool to be from somewhere else. So I quickly lost the accent and stopped speaking Spanish. But you know, everywhere along the way, since we had come to America, somebody had stepped in that would give me guidance, that would give me encouragement along the way. And I know that that is something that is divine. And it just led me to understand that, or develop a thought that I always want to look out for the underdog in any case, which is what I do every day as I represent individuals who may be facing a lawsuit against a big corporation or medical facility or whatnot. But I enjoy being the representative for those underdogs.
And what are your practice areas?
I practice medical malpractice, negligent security, personal injury cases. My partner and I also handle a number of national class actions involving medical devices, hips, knees, mesh, IVC filters, that type of thing.
And where can we get your book?
The book is available at Amazon.com and also Target, as I'm told. You have to say Target. It has the book both in the store and on the website as well.
What do you see? Will you continue to work with the farmers, and what do you see as your sort of next? I know there's another lawsuit, but even beyond that, are there programs or other things that you intend to be involved in?
Yeah, well, you know, with the proceeds from the book, I've created a foundation, the Greg Francis Just Harvest Foundation. And with that foundation, we kind of have three pillars that we want to support. One is education. As a result of that, I've endowed a scholarship at the University of Florida, law school for graduates of HBCUs to come to University of Florida on a full scholarship. So that's kind of the education piece.
Nice.
The family portion of it is I partner with a local church here in town who has a transition home that I have refurbished, where they would invite members of the community in to live there for 6 months to take classes on budgeting and mortgages and that type of thing. They pay rent during those 6 months, but at the end of those 6 months, all the rent is given back to them and hopefully used to encourage them. We've had a pretty good track record of encouraging them to buy a home.
Wow, if only that were real life.
Right.
All your payments come back to you. Love it.
And the third thing is I've partnered with or working with John Rivers from Four Rivers with the farm that is being built here in Orlando. We're going to provide education for students to come out and get involved in agriculture. You know, it's more than just putting seeds in the ground. There's hydroponic farming, there's the business of distributing the goods once they are raised, that type of thing. And in an effort to increase those numbers that I told you are dwindling, we're trying to get some young folks involved and interested in agriculture.
Wow. Wow, thank you for doing all that you do, and it's just been a pleasure to have you. Thank you for spending some time with us.
No, thank you for having me today. I really enjoyed it.
Wow. Now you have a closer look at the plight of Black farmers and the book Just Harvest. We'll be back with more.